Hi, Michael. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great. My day has been made greater because we're going to get to spend some time talking today. I mean that very sincerely. It's just an honor to get to talk to you today.
Oh, it's nice. Thank you.
I'm going to take a quick moment to introduce our future audience to you. Um, like I said, it's an absolute honor to get to spend some time today with guitarist, songwriter, producer extraordinaire Michael Lockwood. Michael's currently promoting the digital reissue of the debut album that they had for Velvet Kiss, Look at the Line, from the band that he was one quarter of, Lions and Ghosts. Um, I just thank you so much for taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy day. Understatement, right? Understatement.
Well, no, I like we were talking earlier.
Yeah, sure.
I'm in the middle of an 81 track mix. Yeah.
So you're in the mode right now. You're in the mode.
That's right. I'll get out of that mode and come to this mode.
Well, thank you for your time again.
Yeah.
So Velvet Kiss, Lick of the Line came out in 1987, which I mean, hard to believe, but that's 35 years ago. I mean, that's crazy that how much time can elapse, and was it the milestone anniversary, or was there another reason why you and the band decided to, put this out now? This was the time to get this reissue going.
That's a great question, and it was a series of events that actually made that happen. It wasn't any one thought.
Sure.
I think always in the back of my mind in recent years, I always thought, well, it's kind of a bummer that it's not available on any of the streaming platforms, especially, when you're talking to somebody and somebody says, oh, they want to reference a song or something, all we have to do is just click on something and then it sends it to you and you're like, da, da, da. In my case, it was more like, well, let me dig out the vinyl, let me dig out the CD, let me find that. I'll have to rip it for you. I'll send it to you. So there's always that sort of little notch, in the brain of going, gosh, I wish. And then other things happen and, you become busy. But really what happened was the pandemic happened.
Right.
And it's, I guess this is also a COVID story because everybody's got them, right? We just the world started shutting down, but I kept making music, and oddly, right before everything shut down, I had gotten a call from a local artist, Kenward Cooper, who lives in Los Angeles, and he emailed me and said, I'd love for you to play on these 3 songs I'm working on. And I thought, well, great, I know him and it'll be fun. And I said, sure, send him over because I have a home studio. And I thought, this is fantastic. I can drink coffee, wear my pajamas, and work on these tracks, right? That's the beauty of it. You probably have pajama bottoms on right now. I wouldn't know.
I wasn't going to say anything about it, but, well, now that you called me on it.
Okay, I don't have shoes on, but anyway. So I'll try to make this long story short, but I thought, great. And he said, actually, I'm going to do them in a studio. And it turns out that it was Rick Parker's studio, who was the singer of Lions and Ghosts.
Right.
And I thought, wow, I haven't seen Rick in about 1.5 million years. This could be interesting. I'm a little nervous because we have so much to talk about and catch up on. So I showed up at the studio and I walked through that door and I went, wow, not a day has changed. As soon as I saw him, it was exactly like it was in 1987, 88, 89, And we ended up sitting there and talking for hours. And at some point, we both looked at each other and we thought, we should get to work because this poor guy is paying for studio time at Rick's studio. We got to stop chatting and get busy. So we worked on his songs. We got them done. It sounded great. And Rick and I exchanged like new email addresses and made sure our phone numbers were the same. And we started talking about, hey, like, what are you working on? What kind of music are you making? So we shared a Dropbox link that we could upload stuff to and listen. He sent me some things he was working on. I sent him things I was working on. And we were passing notes back and forth and nothing was happening very quick, still not in lockdown mode. And so he invited me over to the studio and we just sat across from each other with acoustic guitars and wrote what is now Girl, I Love You, which is the new Lions and Ghosts single.
Yes, love it.
And, then the pandemic happens and all kinds of crazy stuff goes on. And I recorded some guitars for him. I sent him. I never heard from him and time goes by. And then, you know, we're all standing in line trying to buy toilet paper, paper towels, and whatnot. And at some point towards the end of COVID, I got COVID, and I was laying on the couch in some sort of fever dream state, right? And I thought, I'm not going to let this thing go with Rick. I feel like there's something amiss because I haven't really heard from him. So I wrote him, and he wrote me back instantly, and he said, "Oh, I never got the tracks that you sent me." I said, "Oh, how bizarre." So we started the process of finishing that song. Concurrently to that, during the pandemic, I started getting messages through Instagram from a manager named Jeff Keller. And he had met me when I was in Lions and Ghosts, and he and I would have a weekly Zoom meeting and got to know each other. And at some point he said, I want to manage you. How would this work with you? And I said, I think I'm up for it. I don't know what's going on in this world. I don't know what we're going to do. So at some point, he and I were talking about the fact that the Lions and Ghosts records weren't available. And it was getting close to being an anniversary of when it was out. And so we had the conversation, what would it take to make this happen? Like, how difficult would it be? I said, will you and our partners Deco investigate and figure out how to get like the logistical side of it done. And then I'll start searching for B-sides. I'll talk to Rick, I'll talk to the other boys and just see what's going to happen. So all this stuff was all swirling about all at the same time. And then all of a sudden he wrote me, he goes, okay, let's do it. I was like, whoa, okay, hold on. And so in a matter of less than a month, I was able to round up B-sides and, make sure we got all the credits and then becomes all the little details. And at the same time, we're also working with this band Bird Streets, and we're putting out their record, and it was all happening all at the same time. And then we just announced today about a soundtrack that I did during.
Right. Yeah.
We had all this stuff swirling, and it's funny. The Lions and Ghosts thing was a thing that just popped out, and it was a fun adventure and very cathartic and really a great therapy session to sit down with this guy that I'd spent most of the 80s with making music, because clearly I'm the older man now and a lot's happened in life, and you take in all those experiences and you compare them to things that happened in the past. And so it's really a healthy, great journey. I'm super happy that it happened. And then I get to meet a bunch of new people and talk to people that some of them didn't know about the band, because we were quite popular in Southern California, not really anywhere else. So it's nice to now just talk about that and see what people think about it in a modern setting,
Well, I got to tell you, I'm one of those people that, I remember seeing the covers. I remember seeing the album covers because I go to record sales and I do I was always out, looking at record sales and used record stores, new record stores. So I know I've seen the artwork. I know, it's etched in my brain. But I hadn't heard the music, in all honesty. I have now, and I'm so glad that you guys have done this. Because I'm a product of the 80s, okay? I was in high school in the 80s, okay? We're very close in age, and
clearly younger.
And I just love the music. I really do, and
nice.
It still sounds so. It sounds what's the word? It's. Sometimes music you listen to it and you say, well, does it hold up does it stand up the test of time? It absolutely does. You know what I mean? It really does.
Kind of you. That's very kind of you. I thought, going back and listening to everything and remastering it, and I listen to a lot of modern new music. I have two 14-year-olds. So
right.
That's what we listen to in the car. And although they enjoy older music, one of them really enjoys yacht rock, which is bizarre to me because it's like Ariana Grande, Ambrosia. I just don't understand the mix in that, but she loves it. And I was pleasantly surprised at how the production, it does ring of the 80s because it was a product of the 80s, but it wasn't so slathered in gated reverbs and all the things that were happening, music speak. And it really sort of held up. And I've heard from Peter Walsh, the guy who had produced it.
Yeah.
And, he did an amazing job and made great records with a lot of great people. Peter Gabriel, Gene Loves Jezebel, the the Simple Mind records that we all know and love. It's all him, and those records still sound really great. So,
You know, agreed to all of that, because it really is, all those artists and their records and yours definitely held up the test of time and going back. And I think it's always so neat to hear something once it's been, and you're a producer at heart too. I mean, songwriter, guitarist, producer. So you knew how you wanted that to sound. If they were going to remaster it and put it out digitally, you knew how you wanted it to sound, I'm sure.
well, you know, in mastering, not a lot can happen. It can either enhance it ever so slightly, or it can destroy it. It's one. It's one of the two. And so it was not a heavy hand in remastering it. I think these days we've all gotten accustomed to listening to things a lot louder. You know about the loud wars of just, you want it to stand out. And when you're listening to all the streaming platforms or the radio or what have you, you need to compete. So there was a little bit, a thought like that. And also just wanted to open it up a tiny bit. So that's what happened. The mastering guy did a great job. And luckily he had stuff to work with that was really great too, sonically.
Right, absolutely. Knowing how the industry has changed so much, I'm going to step aside from some of my exact questions here. I want to just step aside, since we're talking about this, and ask you, you know, knowing how the industry has changed so much, everything is digital now, and people are listening to compressed files of MP3s. And you're a music guy. I mean, you know, what did you say? How many tracks you say with today? 88 tracks, 90 something tracks you're working on right now?
81 tracks that I'm
81 tracks, okay. And so obviously, you know, all of the detail, all of the intricacy to putting out music so fresh in your mind as a songwriter or producer, you know, how do you feel about the fact that now all of that hard work you're doing in the studio is turning into a compressed file? Is there anything you can do when you create it, knowing it's going to be a compressed file? I wouldn't know the answer to that question, but you know how to make it so it sounds the absolute best it can if they're going to listen to a compressed file.
Sure. Well, part of the problem is not only am I a musician and a music lover, but I'm obsessed with the sonics of music. And part of it for me when I listen to a song is there's the emotion of the lyric, there's all the counterplay of the instruments, but it's the actual recording of it, you know, just something rumble when it's supposed to rumble. Is there something that feels like air over here? All that stuff excites the hell out of me. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I listen to a lot of music, and I'm really I still listen to a lot of vinyl, you know, and I love the convenience of digital platforms. I have a great hi-fi system in the house, and I listen to a lot of high-res music, which is 24-bit music. It's uncompressed. So that for me is like when I cook dinner, I've got on great music and it makes me quite happy. But through the process, I always know that most people are going to listen to whatever this is, God bless, on a phone. So that's where we live. And, you know, my kids listen to their AirPods. And so, you know, I check all these things throughout the process. And especially when you start getting down to prepping for the mix and you get the song as close as I can possibly get it before I give it to somebody to mix it. And sometimes today I'm mixing too. I like both, but there's some amazing people out there. And if they're willing, I'm sending it to them to work on it. Right. But I do listen to stuff back on my phone. I listen to it in the car a lot. I check on headphones. I listened on the great stereo. I listen to it on my computer. It's just, that's what we do these days. And I know that it's going to be compressed down to nothing, and they're going to rip the bass right out of it and lop off all the high end. It's what happens. So knowing that, you do it in the process and make sure that it sounds as good as it can be when it gets to be that big. Yeah.
I love the fact you mentioned that you take the time to listen to what was, you know, not your choice or my choice of listening on a phone necessarily, because, you know, all the sonic details that get left out. But what would it sound like? What would it sound like if I, you know, and for convenience, yeah, you know, for convenience, for sure. I mean, I fought for so long to even have a streaming service on my phone, because I'm all about the physical CD, the album, going back to 8 tracks, going back to 78s. I mean, That's
I'm a,
just me.
I am a lover of all formats, no matter if they're good or bad. Cassette, 8-track. I was a big champion of the mini disc because in
Yeah.
the 90s I was on the road always. And remember when we had big books of CDs and I had my disc player and I'd lay in my bunk and listen to music. And at the end of a tour, I'd come home with like 75 new CDs in my suitcase because I kept all the cases and everything. I mean, those times have changed and I appreciate that. And I do embrace all that technology. I really do love all of it. And I was really pleasantly surprised when Apple decided to go lossless. So they're now streaming stuff in the highest quality that they have, which might be CD, right? And it might be 24-bit. I'll take it all. And there's lots of other services that do that as well now. But at the end of the day, when you're talking to somebody and you're working on something, send me an MP3. It's like, oh, okay. Okay, that's what we're going to do.
It's got to be very difficult to because you care so much about the sound to say, okay, here it is, here's the MP3,
Yep.
and I, even from a consumer viewpoint, and I know I read a recent interview that you had with somebody, a written interview where you had said that you are quite the consumer and were back in the day for sure, consumer music, where at least, and this is an underestimate, I'm sure, one album a week, but on Tuesday and Street Day, remember the excitement of Street Day?
Oh, I love that. I still am there. For me, it's Thursday night at 9 o'clock because that's as soon as they can announce it for the Friday release. Actually, when they changed the days, I was kind of upset for quite a while because I'm a creature of habit and I loved that. I knew, hey, we got new music coming out. And I used to scour, the stores like we were talking about earlier, just go to the record stores and dig through stuff. But also, even on Tuesdays, I would start looking on websites in other countries to see what other music. It's easier now because there's become less borders in music, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And even like how many times have maybe you bought something based on the artwork? It looked kind of cool at the moment. The artwork is gone. You see this is probably, you see that full artwork. Now we look at thumbnails,
I know, but you're right. I hate to admit how many times I'm like, that looks like a cool record. So I just buy it, and $10 later you go, maybe it wasn't so cool. But anyway, that it will get traded in towards something that I eventually will love. Yeah, we do have the convenience now of clicking on that thumbnail and listening. But sometimes still I'm attracted to certain album covers. I'm like, oh, gotta click on, gotta listen to,
Right.
And now you can save things in your library through your streaming service and check it out. So it's and I still buy stuff too. I still buy like high res albums because I'm like, oh, I love that new. What did I hear the other day? I went and saw this band, Warpaint, and they are a Southern California band, and the bass player's name is Jenny Lee. And I went and saw them and I came home and just searched everywhere to buy high resolution files of those records. And their records sound great. And Jenny Lee's, the bass player, is a producer and her record is really great. And I had missed it. I never knew about them. They never came along. So I'm still a consumer.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I really am. It's always hard for me. I don't know if maybe I've bought 2 or 3 or 4 digital tracks in my life and everything else is physical. I listen to it, the streaming service where now you pay the subscription fee or whatever. But I just have to go and buy the CD. I like the liner notes. I like the artwork or the album, the gatefold. I love that.
Do we think that CDs are making a comeback?
Boy, I worked for so many years for record labels, and I was so disappointed to see because that's my job went away when CDs went away, and I would love to see somehow that come back. I would love not to go back in the industry. I think I'm at a point in my life where I probably wouldn't go back in that direction. But as a consumer, would I love to see CDs back on the shelf? And the vinyl is just amazing how the vinyl has just really become such a thing.
It's outselling CDs. I mean,
it's crazy.
CDs are certainly waning in sales, but I will tell you this. As a record buyer and hitting the shops and digging through the bins, I am noticing there's more CDs being stocked in those stores. And
you're absolutely right.
And I find there's sometimes I look for a record, I'm like, you can't get it. Well, of course I know that because the Lions and Ghosts record was like that. But there are records that I forget about, and then somebody mentions to me, and then I start looking for them. and I got to go find a used CD of it. And I feel it, I have lots of friends that are buying cassettes again, and
Yeah.
it's fun. Look, I have a drawer full of mini discs and a bunch behind here in the shelving. still have a mini disc player hooked up to my stereo. People are like, "What is that?" Because it never was that popular, but not in the
But the
States.
technology worked. I mean, the technology worked. I know people who use mini disc, for listening and for recording, and it worked. It was a moment in the time of configurations that the people who used it appreciate it and still use it. Why
Yeah,
not? Right? It
I
doesn't
know.
disintegrate. It doesn't just disappear into thin air. It's still out there.
No, that's right. That's right.
So, but yeah, I agree with you. I think that and there was a period of time, and I watched it happen. Like I said, I worked for one of the 5 majors, whatever, and I watched it happen, just little by little erode. And I kept saying to myself, how could we ever get to a place where there's not a physical configuration of some kind? We all lived in a lifetime where whatever the configuration was, there was always something.
Well, I did see this coming. I saw the subscription-based model. It started to flourish, and I went, I don't want this. I mean, I don't want my house full of stuff, but at the same time, it gives very little value, don't you think, to something when you can't actually hold it. So you're spending what, $10 a month to listen to music, all these zeros and ones floating around, but you don't have it. So it was, for me, it was art based, and that took away some of the art based, right? It took away the artwork, the lyrics, the whole presentation of it. It's interesting. We'll see what happens. I feel that people might be missing it a bit. And I know younger generations, there are handfuls and pockets of the younger generations that are like, oh, yeah, I like having, this, and looking at it and admiring the time that somebody went into the artwork or whatever.
And there was a time when people were buying vinyl in the last 10 years, maybe just buying vinyl because it was purple or it was orange or it looked cool. But now it's like, as I teach music lessons, and as I talk to some of my students, they're out there buying vinyl to listen to it, to not just because it's a cool piece to have it. They're buying it and listening to it. And my own nieces, I mean,
it's a great experience putting on a record and then taking the time to look at stuff and then flipping it over. Like, you have to interact with it.
How about Tom Petty and Full Moon Fever? I don't know if you when he's got the CD, and at the middle of it he says, "This is the time when you'd be turning over the record."
I remember that. That's right. Now
So,
you're making me want to go listen to that record. Yeah.
Right? It's a great record. Yeah, it's just funny that we were locked into 5 songs on side A, 5 songs on side B, and it was funny that homage to the record when he did that with Full Moon Fever. So before we get too deep into some of the questions about your career, I just want to get this question away about Lions and Ghosts. How did the name come about?
I wish I had a great answer, because you're right. All that question gets asked a lot. So the way that I would explain it would be that Lions and Ghosts was an entity before I joined the band. They were a 3-piece band called Banner, which was kind of a mod band, a little bit like the Jam in that kind of world, right? And the drummer was on, I think, a holiday vacation with his girlfriend, and I knew his girlfriend. We had a lot of friends in common, and they happened to come to this bar, and I was playing in a top 40 band. And at the end of the night, I met him. We talked a bit. He said, "We're looking for another member to this band I'm in. Would you maybe be interested?" And I think I said yes without hearing it and anything. It's like, top 40 band, play original music. Yes, original music. So I went down and auditioned at this rehearsal place in East Hollywood, and it was great. I loved it. And they had already changed the name to Lions and Ghosts, and it was very reflective of the kind of music that they were writing and working on. So it had a post-punk thing happening to it. It had a nice little goth tinge to it, which never really that didn't really find its way so much onto the record or the later Lions and Ghosts, but those were our beginnings. And so I always thought that the image I got in my mind of the band's name was indicative of the sound when I joined the band.
Gotcha.
And that does not answer your question at all. So,
but it's interesting though to know about that time when that was evolving in from that band into Lions and Ghosts. It's interesting to hear that. Do you have a favorite song on that album? I mean, or is it just too hard to pinpoint because they're all like kind of your children in a sense? Each song is for a different reason.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes that changes too. It's funny. I think when we did the record, probably my little favorite child at the time was When the Moon Was Full.
Okay.
And then I think that's because Side Story is that while making the record, we ended up making the record at Tony Visconti's studio in London. It's because that's where Pete wanted to work. We had asked Tony Visconti to produce the record and he declined, and I don't even know why, but after we started working there, we saw him all the time and he came in and out all the time. And at some point he was like, I'd love to do the strings for your record. And so the day of tracking the strings, none of us heard the strings before. This was, before the digital age, right? So we were sitting in the room, the strings are playing live. And then when the guitar solo comes in, the strings went with it. And I went, oh, this is Tony Visconti. This is T-Rex. This is Bowie, and that was, for me, one of my favorite children on the record, as you aptly put it. But I think now, after years, and even back then, Stay was a big favorite of mine. I always loved that song. There was something about it. And in later years, a lot of people have come to me and said they really like it. But the most popular songs on the record are Passion, Mary Goes Round, Man in a Car. I think the first part of the record are people's favorites. I
like the last track, to be honest with you, too. Was it called Be Yourself, right?
No, Be Yourself is a B-side.
Oh, it's a B-side. Okay, so that was one that was added on for the...
That was added on, that's right. That's a song that didn't make the record.
I like that song. Yeah, I like what I like from guitar viewpoint. I mean, I'm not a guitarist, but I'm a sonic listener, like you say. I love the way that the guitars start to come in, just kind of a strum, and then you hear it get deeper and echo, and it's just a really cool. Just that then the whole direction changes. I listen to it.
Oh wow. I do like that song a lot. That's funny. That is an older song. It's one of the first songs that we all did together, and it was a staple for a long time. And then when we did the record, it's funny when you go through the process, it didn't seem to sit with everything else, but it also, we left it off the record. It ended up being a B-side to Mary Goes Round. So I made sure that it went on because now it sounds like it fits to me. I'm like, why didn't we just put it on the record? But it's interesting.
Yeah, I love it, actually. I mean, I really do. And I guess, at the time you had to decide 5 songs on side A, 5 songs on side B. It wasn't the 74-minute CD that we have now. You know what I mean? It wasn't that at that point.
Oh, we didn't even know if it was going to come out on CD. We were hoping it was going to come out on CD because it was newer technology at that point.
Yeah, and I remember when they did first come out the CDs, and I remember thinking, how the laser discs for the movies, right? These big honking laser discs, and they were 30, 40. Yeah, right. We've embraced all these technologies, Michael.
I love it. Yeah.
Much to the chagrins of our families that we're pack rats when it comes to music, I'm sure. But but it's these configurations were out there. We bought into them, we did.
Yeah.
But I remember when the CDs, I was working in the record store at the time, and I had all this vinyl and cassettes, like you said, cassettes. Still have my 1,000 cassettes, much to my wife's chagrin.
Wow, that's impressive.
They're in the garage though, so they're in the garage. but I remember saying that I'll probably never have more than a handful of these CDs because they were at the time $20 to $25 a piece.
So expensive. That's right. Yeah.
And so I didn't think, but unfortunately, then after working in a record label and working in stores and the employee discount and buying this, my 2 rooms of CDs now, and it's just I never imagined that it would be like that because $25 a shot. But then
I remember when you went to the CD section, it wasn't bigger than maybe like 3 little rows of stuff, and you could get 1812 Tchaikovsky, you could get Simple Minds, Glittering Prize, David Bowie's Let's Dance. Those were like the hip ones, right?
Right.
And then there was hardly anything to choose from.
Yeah.
And I got this from my father. He was a consumer too, like that, where new technology, we got to try it. We're getting the Betamax. Okay. We're getting a laser
Yep,
disc.
yep.
Hey, we're going VHS. Okay. Hey, we have satellite TV. What? You know, he was that guy, and he
Yeah.
loved CDs when they came out.
Yeah, so that's why I guess it's so hard for me right now that the configuration is not really as supported as it used to be. Once it did get out of that mode of just the popular 30 titles, it blew up to everything was on CD, and now it's kind of gone back this way, you know.
Yeah. Now nothing's on CD. That's right.
Right, you know. I was curious as to which mix of Contradiction is your personal favorite. I mean, do you have a favorite? Or I mean, it's always interesting when there's multiple mixes of the same song. Each one has a different tinge to it.
Yeah. Well, boy, I did listen to those a lot as we went through this process. And it's funny. I really enjoy all of them because they're fun. They're very, very 80s. And are there four? Is that right? I believe
there were four. Is that right? Four? I think four, right?
Okay. I believe there's four. Three of them were by a duo out of New York. And it was Murray Elias and Justin Strauss. That's their name. They did them, and they were commissioned to do them by EMI.
Okay. So they mixed them. Okay.
The fourth track is done by a guy named Steve Churchyard, and he was quite popular in the 80s. He worked with everyone, and his list of people he's worked with is incredible. And I'd forgotten he was also on our short list to work with as a producer, and he was unable to do it too, but he did one of the remixes. And I don't know if it's the Psycho remix, but I really like his remix. Of course I would. I'm a guitar player, and it was very guitar driven.
Yeah.
Like he chopped up all the guitars and made them stutter and did all this great stuff with them. So I really like that one. I think they're all really great, but maybe I lean a little more towards Steve's remix only because I'm a guitar player.
Right. It's interesting this on the outside that they made these mixes of your song it's interesting.
We had nothing to do with it at all. In fact, there was, I think at the time, do you remember Jelly Bean Benitez? He did.
Oh, sure.
I think that EMI was talking to him. They were talking to whoever was popular at the time. We got to get the dance remixes out there. It's funny because we wouldn't really be a candidate for that, but I'm happy that we have.
There probably are a lot of bands out there that at that time that, like you said, the dance remix was the fourth 12-inch single, a dance remix for the clubs and everything. And some of these bands were probably like, we're really not. We're more prog rock, but if you want to make the remix, we'll. But yeah, that was the time when everybody was at a 12-inch single, right? 12-inch.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I understand that when the album was originally released, I think you had said that, or I read it, that Mary Goes Round was the first single, right?
It was the first single, and there was a video for it.
So did you, just knowing, and again, just talking about being like in that world of video, of music companies and labels, I was just curious from your perspective, did the band get to choose that was the first song? I love the song. They're all the songs are great. So I would think because they all are your children, how hard it would be to pick just one song to go with first.
I guess, maybe this was a conversation that was always happening even before we went to record. And obviously the recording process changed a bit. I can say this in retrospect, I think it was the wrong choice, but at the time, I think it was just a given that was going to be the first single.
Yeah.
And then I think Contradiction was the second single. And Passion never came out as a single in the States, but came out as a single overseas in the Scandinavian countries. That to me probably should have been the single we should have gone with first. It makes the most sense.
I love it. I love that song. And it starts the album, right? It starts the album,
and it sounds, in retrospect, it sounds like a single.
It really does. Yeah. I think it's always interesting that sometimes, sequencing becomes so important when you're making an album. That's the other thing. Now that people are using streaming services, they're hitting the shuffle button sometimes, or just happening across one song. And you as a musician, you're working so hard to think about the order of these songs and how this one fits to that one and how these all kind of sequence in together. I think it's interesting sometimes how bands will sometimes pull a single from deeper in the album as the first single. Maybe sometimes it's a label option, or maybe it's not. But
Right.
I've just been accustomed to know the first song on the album is going to pull you in, and the single, you know.
Right. But that's a mindset of, I think, I don't want to date us, but you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
of that time period, and sequencing a record was, I think, an art form, just like making
Yes.
making a mixtape. Now we make playlists. It's all the sort of same thing. But what I do notice, and talking to people, like I just got married a few days ago. And
Congratulations. That's awesome.
thank you
Congratulations.
very much. And my wife is oh, she'll kill me. She's 45 years old. I'm telling her age, right? She doesn't listen to albums.
Yeah.
And so that her generation is, I think, two from mine. And she's more about, like, I want to hear this song, I want to hear that song, I want to hear this song. No rhyme, no reason. She is a shuffle person. She is a you know, go to a streaming network and just type in yacht rock and listen to yacht rock for an hour or whatever.
Sure.
And my kids are the same way. They're all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason. And you can't get any of them to sit down and listen to an album from start to finish. But I still do. I enjoy that experience. And I'm curious to know, why did they choose that song after that song? Oh, that was a nice flow. Like, all that still, that's how my brain works. That's the way we grew up too. You know, we bought singles. I'm sure you bought.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All the single was a teaser for the record, right? You're like, okay, I got the 45, but maybe I get a B-side, but I'm got to go get the album, you know?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
I suppose that the playlist now is the new album, but that's all automated. That's all done by, you know, algorithms that are, you know, made to figure out what songs do most people listen to when they listen to the other song. That's not how you make a record. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a different time, and I guess part of us has to be happy that people are taking the time to listen to the music, but just wish that sometimes you could just sit someone down and say, hey, I think we have so much coming at us, you know, so much social media and so much media, to just sit down and say, listen to this record from start to finish, you know, and just take it all in and think about the words and think about how this song led into that song. And even then, let's not even talk about concept albums, right? How about then a concept album that you really had to listen to, because it, you know, I mean, every album in its own way to a songwriter, I would think, is a concept album, because you put these songs together. But when someone really says, oh, this is a concept album about forestry or whatever it is, you know, I mean,
I agree with you 100%. That's weird. The concept album probably has fallen out of favor because we don't live in that age. But you know, I talked about Bird Streets for a second. I've been working with John the singer for the last couple years, and his brain, he's a younger guy, his brain still works in that concept way, where when he writes songs, he might write a song that doesn't fit into the concept of these other songs. So he pulls it aside and he puts it, and he creates all these different records that he's making. And the record we're about to put out, really, it is a concept record because it's about his divorce and everything. And when I started listening to it all in context, I went, oh my gosh, it is a concept record, you know?
Right. Wow.
Love it.
I have listened to that first track, the track that was released. I'm trying to think of the name of it. I haven't.
Was it from we just did Machine.
Yeah, Machine. That's the song I heard. Machine. I knew it started with an M. I couldn't think of what it's called, but it's Machine. Yeah.
That's like the first official single. We did release a single a few months ago called Unkind, and Aimee Mann played bass on it. We had some really great guys coming in. That's on the record as well. In fact, I got some crazy news right before you signed on. It's on the long list to be nominated to become a Grammy nomination.
Wow.
So we're at the first little tiny level, right? We still got to get on the short list. We're on the long list.
But that's huge. That's huge, though, you know?
It's amazing. When I got that news, I went, what? That can't be possible. That's a joke, right? But it's real. I'm so pleased to even think that somebody put it on the long list, right?
It's fantastic, because it's still, the long list is still a short list for all the music that's out there. So much music.
Thank you. I'll tell everyone you said that.
It's the truth, right? I mean, think about it, especially now the music that we didn't even know existed across the world because of the internet. There
Yeah.
is so many people writing songs, and I'm an amateur songwriter, but I always worried, like, what if somewhere in Indonesia or something, someone's writing the same line and melody by coincidence as me? I mean, I just worry about that. I go so hard on my way to make it not sound like anybody else because I worry.
Right. But it is a bizarre concept that it rarely happens.
Right.
Billions of people and billions of people writing songs, billions of people putting out their music on the internet because
Yep.
anybody can now.
Right.
Anybody can make a video, anybody can make an album, single in their bedroom, in their car, walking down the street, and they all do. And still, all of us have this gift of being able to make it uniquely our own.
Absolutely. Yes. So well said. Well said. I mean, really. I want to step back for a second and talk. You brought up Tony Visconti before. I mean, that had to be amazing. And I didn't know the story that you had actually asked him to produce the record, and he at the time declined, but you won him over when you're in his studio and hearing all the great music. I mean, for people who don't realize, I mean, I don't know, have you ever seen this book, this encyclopedia of record producers?
No.
It's a really cool book. Yeah, encyclopedia. And so I pulled it. And see who the publisher. Oh, it's a Billboard book. It's made by Billboard Books. Okay. So but I pulled it, I read, I know I'd heard the name for sure, and I am a big music fan, but I missed pockets of, some of the people that I should know. But to just read, like you said before, David Bowie, T-Rex, but there's so many, right? So many bands. They have a whole list in here of all the bands. And if it's just amazing. The lighting's terrible here, but
Thin Lizzy, so many bands of the 70s. And also, Tony Visconti was an artist too. He made a record. He was in a band before he'd met Bowie. Back when I was a kid and I was listening to these Bowie records, I always thought Tony Visconti was English. He's not. He's a New Yorker.
Huh.
He's an East Coast guy, right? And so funny, he lived in England. His studio was in Soho. So he's made so many influential records and worked with such great artists. He's super gifted. I mean, that the luck of us asking and he said no, and then ending up in his studio. What are the odds of that happening?
It's an awesome story. It's awesome.
I mean, the producer, Peter Walsh, he said, my wife's pregnant, so I can't come to the States. Would you guys come to England and work? And we're like, yeah. No,
you thought about it for about 1 second.
Like a nanosecond, right?
Yeah, right.
And we ended up, we stayed in Earl's Court for a long time, and then we moved to Soho Square, and we lived above McCartney's publishing company in Soho Square, and we walked down the street to Gooder's studio where Tony was all the time and go through his cupboards and closets. It's like fuzz pedals and all this crazy stuff. Who knows? It could have been Mark Bolan's, it could have been Mick Ronson's, who knows? But it was such a cool experience. And then just, towards the end of the project, for him to say, I'd love to do the strings, we're like, wow. I mean,
and then when you hear, amazing. And then when you hear those strings fill out the songs, I mean, like, you can, when you're sitting there with a guitar and you're coming up with your lyrics and your melody and you've got this in your head, and then to hear how in the process, and much of it is what you've done, of course, with your production background and then the rest of the band filling it out, drums and everything, but then to hear strings layer in, it's like a dream, right? A dream sequence.
Always. And I still feel the same way to this day. I've never lost that feeling ever. I don't know why strings resonate so deeply with me, but if there's a chance or an opportunity to get strings on a track, I'm the first one in. In fact, if it were up to me, I'd have strings on every track.
and authentic strings too. I mean, actual musicians. He had a little mini orchestra in that room, right? They were sitting there. The violins, the violas, the cellos, Oh,
it's so thrilling. When I worked with Aimee Mann, we did Lost in Space, and we did a string section at A&M Records in the big room there. And I remember just sitting there behind the desk, and I was producing, and Amy's sitting there, everyone's talking, and we're doing the run through, and I'm just sitting there listening, and they finish after the run through. I'm like, oh my God. And everyone's freaking out. And I said, I think the cellos are out of tune. And everyone looked at me. I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is forever.
Right.
Let's do it one more time.
Right. I mean, right. You record a song 37 times and it's just perfect. But if there's that one thing, you're right. That this is what people will hear. And this is, even it's just funny. I mean, I always think about like sometimes when you hear a favorite singer or something sing things a certain way on the album, and then you go see the tour, and you're expecting it to happen that way. And you know, it's kind of nice for it to not happen that way, for it to be more spontaneous. By the
Yeah.
same token, some people changed it up so much that you're so used to that place right before the bridge where they're going to do this yodel or something, or this run, or this whatever it's going to be, you know. And we get so used to it because that's what's etched on the radio or etched on the recording.
Absolutely. And I just know from working with other people for years, I've watched people change things up. It's because they're bored.
Right.
Because they've been playing that one song for 20 years. I won't name any names and I won't point any fingers, but it's like, how can we F this up in a way that makes it tolerable for them to do every night? Because they're just, I think, so overdoing it that way. But you're right, as a consumer and a lover of music, and you go to a concert and somebody does this bizarre version of your favorite song, it can be disappointing. It can be thrilling,
Right.
but I found more often than not, it doesn't. I'm disappointed.
Yeah, well, you nailed it on the head. I mean, and I'm not going to mention this band's name at all, but very, very famous 80s band. And I've seen them many times. Love them, love them. Not going to say their name, but love them. And this one tour, the double bill with another big band, and it's so excited. Oh, wow, two of my favorite bands now, same night. And every version, and I love jazz music, but this was a pop band. This was an 80s sensibility pop band. Every song had like a groove to it. And it was just not that power pop sound of the 80s that I had heard on so many tours with this band. Right. I was like, oh, it just, and I almost left, and I would never do that. This is my favorite artist. You know, I sat there and I took it all in and listened to it, but I was like, something just doesn't seem right tonight. I've seen him so many times. And I realized at the end when I analyzed it, they were just trying to get a different groove. Everything had a jazz feel to it. And these were pop top 40 songs that hit after hit after hit, but they were all done in a jazz style. Because like you hit on the head, they probably just tired of playing the same version of those songs over and over every tour.
And you're going to tell me who that is as soon as you click off the record button.
When we click off the record, we'll talk about that. Yes. Offline, we'll definitely talk about that. I have those couple records with me. You were talking about the Aimee Mann records, you know, the physical configurations, you know. And so on Bachelor #2, you were all over the record playing guitar and other sort. I think there's one track that says and cheesy keyboard or something. It says in the credits, right?
I am the king of the cheesy keyboard. Yeah.
But then on Lost in Space, I mean, you produced that whole record with, you know, a couple of things where this person helped a little bit here, but you were the executive producer overall. So you spent a lot of time working with Aimee Mann. It's just neat because, again, another artist, 80s artist, who then on her own had built her solo career, and more of an independent artist, got away from the whole, it has to be this formula, and made these great records. And if I remember correctly, when this was out, Bachelor #2 was really, really critically acclaimed. As like, wow, Aimee Mann, you know.
I know she has a charmed career, if you ask me. I mean, she earned all of it because she writes songs like nobody's business, and her lyrics are so insightful and thoughtful and thought-provoking. And I've always loved, you know, all of her records. Whoever she works with, it doesn't matter who it is, you get so much ear candy. It's unbelievable. I was really fortunate to somehow end up being in that position to be working with her. And it came through John Bryan, I guess he was on the last Till Tuesday record, actually. And then he ended up producing her first few solo records. And I became friends with John through Jason Faulkner, if you know who he is.
I do.
Okay, so Jason and I were friends because Jason almost was in Lions and Ghosts.
Oh, really?
Towards the end of Lions and Ghosts, we decided to bring in another guitar player. And all of us were rushing to bring in our friends. It's like, oh, but no, what about my friend? Oh, but what about your friend? You know?
Sure.
Oh, at some point, I think Jason had just left the 3 o'clock, maybe. And then I was trying to get him to come in and play with us. And it unfortunately never happened, but Jason and I have been friends forever. And Jason came to me at some point and he said, hey, he was in a band, The Grays, with John Bryan and a bunch of other great musicians. And Jason came and he said, hey, my friend John, you know John, he said, John is going to still produce Aimee Mann's records, but he doesn't want to go on the road anymore. And we thought you would be a great fit for her band. So Jason and I went and saw her play at the Roxy Theater on Sunset when she was on tour. And we had this great time. And within a couple of days, I think it was, Aimee came and visited me. I was working in a guitar store on Sunset. She came in with John Bryan, and she came in with Jack Joseph Puig, another great producer and engineer. And we went walking around Sunset Boulevard. We talked for a while. We went to the Sunset Grill. We had a garden burger. And then she called me and said, do you want to come to the studio tonight? So I came in and I played on the song Long Shot, which is from the record I'm Was Stupid. It's the opening track. And we stayed up all night talking. And I went, wow, this is, and at that point, I'd only ever been in original bands. I'd never worked for somebody. But after working with her, I went, I never want to do anything else ever. I love being somebody's right-hand man. I love giving them 2.5 cents. I love that. That's all I need. All I need is give them 2.5 cents and I'm good, you know? So that I lucked into that whole thing, and I started, you know, it was a progression, play live. Well, we're going to go in the studio, and then I'm more in the studio, more in the studio. Then we wrote a song together for the movie Magnolia, which is on Bachelor #2. And then we started working on Lost in Space, and then
that's Driving Sideways, right? Is that Driving Sideways?
That's right. That's right. It is Driving Sideways. Yep.
Great song. Great song.
Well,
love it. Here's the Magnolia soundtrack. So between this and this, I was just kind of doing my homework a little bit and listening to. I love the song. I mean, we actually, the record label I had worked for at the time put the Magnolia soundtrack out, and I wasn't as familiar at the time because so many releases were coming out to listen to everything that was hitting our desk, you know. But then I, as a consumer, then later on bought this and said, hey, this song is on both, you know.
Well, it's interesting how that all happened. We started working on Bachelor #2, and you know, I'd also worked with Fiona Apple concurrently. So as a cycle ended, I would work with this other person, that cycle would end, and you go back to this one. And, you know, that's the way the 90s worked for me. Yeah. And at the time, LA is such a tiny little planet of its own, right? At the time, Fiona was dating Paul Thomas Anderson, the guy that directed and wrote Magnolia.
Okay.
So I knew Paul there, but then Paul was coming to the studio to visit Aimee. And I'm like, wow, it's such a small world.
Right,
well,
right.
I didn't know that he was writing Magnolia not based on, but he was inspired by some of the songs that Aimee was working on and writing, right? And Aimee's husband, Michael Penn, had done soundtracks for Paul, and John had done soundtracks for Paul. They're just all this, you know? And I remember being in the studio with Aimee, working on Bachelor #2, and then I did a show with Fiona somewhere, and we were backstage, and Paul came up to me and he goes, I got a little surprise for you. You're going to be quite happy with me. And so then I found out later that he was using Driving Sideways. Big honor to have that in that movie.
Yeah.
That cast of characters. And, you know, it's so amazing to go to the theater and watch all those songs unfold with that. That movie's just a great, crazy movie. And in my mind, somehow it's the Graduate of my generation, where the movie is so movie centric and based on all these songs. But anyway, that's my story about that. Those records were made at the same time. They were just, some songs were taken out of that for the movie.
Right. Very interesting. Now, did you tour then? I mean, I think I read that you had toured a little bit then with. Did you do the tour when Aimee and Michael did their tour together?
I did. I think I did it all. I did all of those ones. It was called acoustic vaudeville, and it wasn't very acoustic. But there was a comedian that would open the show generally, and then we would do a mixture of Aimee's music and Michael's music. That was an amazing treat. And we recorded a large portion of that. And at some point, I mixed 2 songs that was going to be a live album for that. I'd love to see. That got shelved, but boy, would I love to hear that now.
That would be amazing too, because 2 very prolific songwriters together, happen
Yeah.
to be married also, but two very prolific songwriters to share a stage and share songs and the recordings and everything.
Oh, and the banter between the both of them was great.
Yeah,
They were super chatty with the audience. Did you happen to ever see any of those shows?
I did. And you know what I did? I pulled last night because I knew we were gonna have this opportunity to talk. I pulled my ticket stubs up because I just want to see if you were. So this was 2000 at the Park West in Chicago. Was I don't know how when you go from city to city, all the different theaters.
I remember the Park West.
So this was at the Park West. It was to be specific, it was March 14th of 2000. And it was Aimee and Michael. And I was wondering if you were on that show.
I think I'm almost positive I was, because I remember the Park West, but I have played there other times too.
Right.
But during that time period, we were doing Lost in Space. And I think what would happen is we'd do a little pocket of recording, and then we'd go out on the road and we'd play a bit. And some of those shows were with Michael for acoustic vaudeville, because I have some pictures from that still. And I think we also, Aimee was doing, God, we did, during that time period, there was so much recording. We did a song for the movie Enough, which was a Michael Mann film that starred Jennifer Lopez. And she also did a song for West Wing, the series. We did an appearance on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We did so much stuff during that period. But I think I was only, at that time, I think I was only working with Aimee, and I was also writing and producing on Ben Taylor's first solo record that never came out, sadly. But I think it was mostly Aimee during that period. So I'm positive that I was on those shows. I think I did all the acoustic vaudeville shows.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it was, I remember the show being just fantastic to have the two artists that I mean, two artists that I really loved on that tour. And then just the icing on the cake to know that, then all the people behind it, people don't realize the amazing assembly of musicians that come together for these shows. And you were right in there and part of that. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was I think it was a really good band. I think Buddy Judge, who's a great singer-songwriter, who was also in the Grays and had played with Aimee in a later version of Till Tuesday. He was singing backups. And I think he was playing acoustic guitar. Patrick Warren, who's an amazing keyboard player and string arranger. They had such great players. It was really an honor to be in that band. My job is to F things up. I just make a bunch of noise and play along. That's my job.
I remember I was looking at your website the other day, and you have kind of like a list of, I think it was actually a VHS tape that had a list of all the appearances, like the Letterman show and this show, when we're doing some of these songs with the various artists that you work with. And another one that was listed on there was Susanna Hoffs.
Right. Yeah.
Did you go on the road with her when she did that solo album?
I did. Yeah.
So we met each other twice, possibly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was another great little. I got a call from her manager. I saw you play with Aimee Mann. You'd be a great fit for Susanna. And so she's lovely. She's really, really lovely, super talented. And it was a really bizarre gig because it was almost always just Susanna and I. We went to Europe together. We went to Japan together. We did loads of television together. We did a very sort of shorter tour with a full band. Is that what you saw? Did you see?
I think so. This was 97. I'm just, again, my ticket stuff off my phone. Because I wanted to be able to not have to look at a wall of ticket stubs to find it. So I played this one last night, and it was 97. It was at the Double Door in Chicago, which is a tiny stage. I mean, really.
We did little tiny stages with Susanna when it was with the band. Yeah.
I mean, the place holds probably 120 people, maybe. Yeah, and the stage just step off the floor, and that's it. And there was Susanna and her band, and really great show on that one solo album she did.
That's cool. And that drummer's Dan McCarroll. He was also in the Grays.
Okay.
We're somehow all interconnected. I don't know how or why, but yeah, that was a great experience doing the Susanna thing. It was a lot of like one-on-one acoustics. Like we both play acoustic guitar and she'd sing, and we did tons of television appearances. And I think the way I met her is I'm an extra in her first video. So to me, playing guitar in in that video. And then we went on the road together. Yeah, great experiences. I am so fortunate I got to play with so many great singer-songwriters.
Yeah, you've had really just an amazing career. The different things that different people that you've crossed paths with and worked with, and all of your own work and all of the amazing, like I said, all the amazing things you've done. It's really something. Really
Thanks.
something. When you mentioned Ben Taylor, is that how you said you'd work with Ben Taylor on some solo work? Is that how you ended up working with Carly later on, or?
It is, yeah, it is. It's always some weird pathway. And I was working with Fiona Apple, and the A&R guy at the work group, her label, had asked me to come work with Ben Taylor because Ben had written a bunch of songs, but I don't think that I'm pretty sure he'd never been in a band and never really interacted with other musicians to sort of flesh out all of the stuff. And I met him. We worked on some songs, he and I, and this drummer, Larry Chancia, who was the drummer in Fiona Apple's band as well. And so we ended up writing songs with Ben, helping him arrange. We made demos. We sat in a rehearsal place and did all this stuff. And at some point, we started working with some producers in England to make a record for the work group. And then I went and stayed with Ben, who stayed on the property, his mom's property in Martha's Vineyard. And so we met his mom, and I mean, hello. Carly Simon, I don't need to say anything else. You just have the instant crush. And and when we were there, she asked me to play, I think, acoustic guitar on a song she was working on. So I went in her little office and we did this song. And then when she started making a record, she asked me to come play at it. So I went and stayed at her house in Martha's Vineyard, and we recorded it in her barn. It was amazing.
And I think the bedroom tapes, is that right? Is that the one that was?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I have this anthology, and I saw your name in the credits for this, and the anthology for, I think, 2 tracks on this that had made it from that album to the anthology.
Yeah, that's right. I think that came out soon after the bedroom tapes, or the next something.
Right.
She was great. We did the wackiest tour I've ever done. We got a Winnebago, and it was her and her husband and I. And I think I had a rental car, and we would just tag team, and we'd go to radio stations all along the East Coast and the Northeast up there. And that was a whole summer of doing that. It was so much fun.
That had to be amazing. I mean, because just truly a gift to see her live one time, because she typically doesn't tour.
That's
doesn't
right.
like to be on that stage that she said. And so she did a tour, and she was in Chicago, and she had Ben with her, and Sally, her daughter.
They're both great. Yeah,
they're one of the harmonies they were doing and everything. And she said the best way I could be on this tour, to do this with you in this big, Chicago theater, big theater, thousands of people, a couple thousand, probably, a couple thousand. She said, I had to recreate my living room on this stage with my actual lamp and my couch and everything, to feel comfortable, to feel at home with you, because otherwise I don't want to be here. I said I had to bring my son and my daughter with. And so she told that whole story to the audience, and we really felt like we were in her living room. I mean, we really did.
But boy, does that sound like Carly. That is so Carly. She, like a lot of people, I mean, it's the comforts of home. It's hard to go out on the road and go do, you give up. A lot of people think it's really glamorous. It's not so glamorous, but it's a lot of fun, and it's an adventure. And God, I think I did 12 years of that, of just being on the road. That's why now it's hard to get me to want to travel now. I'm like, I've done it. I know I need to go. I know we need to go on vacation, but I'm very cozy right here making music.
Right. Especially after a couple of years where we really had to be kind of in this stopped state with the pandemic, that we really got used to being at home and not being, even in our local worlds, being out and about, being more in a studio,
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, for me, not a lot changed. I was at first quite happy, but then it got so strange because I have kids too, and the kids didn't really want to live in that lockdown world.
I bet.
So, and they were younger then too, obviously, because, they were 11-ish or 10-ish, and it's like, let's go, go, go. So it was a weird balance of, I was able to go and do with them, but on my own, I'd be right here in front of my computer, writing music or working on something.
Sure. When Lions and Ghosts were making the second album, Wild Garden, and I had read that you were down the hallway from U2 working on Rattle and Hum. I have to think, I mean, they had just come off the Joshua Tree, you know, their big breakthrough album. I mean, the great albums before they were fantastic, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
Unforgettable Fire and Boy and all those War, great albums, great, great, great. But when they really got that commercial, you know,
Was then.
success, Joshua Tree, right? That was the time. So I have to think that was pretty inspirational to be down the hall when they're recording Rattle and Hum after coming off Joshua Tree.
It wasn't even down the hall. They were in every room in the studio except for ours. They had completely taken over. It's now called Henson Studios, but it was then A&M Studios, which was one of my favorite studios. And every room has a lot of personality. You know, there's a teeny tiny room where the Carpenters made all their records. That's one of my favorite rooms. And I brought Aimee there to work. And Lines and Ghosts had like this sort of the Studio C or something, I think it was, with this giant crystal in it. And that's where we made most of Wild Garden. And every other room, I think there was 4 or 5 other rooms, was occupied by U2. And each guy from U2 had their own room. They were working on stuff. So maybe there's drum overdubs over there, or they're doing vocals over this studio. And they were always there. They were nice guys. It's so funny. We were working on a track, Arson in Toyland, the first track. And I remember we walked out and they were like, sounds like it's Keith Richards in there. And I thought, oh, thank you.
That's awesome. That is so cool.
I'll take that. I'm not sure if it was supposed to be a compliment, but I'm going to take it.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God. And also, you know, when you're in a studio like that, you become, everyone that works there is part of your family. You know, the producer, the engineer, the T-boy, the tape boy, the receptionist, the whoever. And we became really good friends with this guy named Rob Jacobs, who was just starting out. And the little side story that I love about that era is I heard, you know, that there was a lot of time invested in that U2 record, clearly, right? They spent months making that. And, you know, they were the kind of band that they were in the position where that version of the song didn't work out. They did another version and another version, another version. And I heard that the mix for Angel of Harlem was impossible to get, that everybody had a hand at it. And I won't even say who the producers were, the mixers were, and they couldn't get it. And I relished in the story is that Rob stayed there late one night. Now he is a just budding engineer and probably the guy that went and got tea and food for everybody. It's his mix on the record.
Wow, that is something. That's such a cool story.
Isn't that amazing? I was so happy when I heard about that. And I mean, he's very successful now, but at the time he was just starting out and it was his mix that they chose over everybody. So
that's amazing. Amazing. Wow. I get a chill just thinking about, I mean, think about that. The revolving door of producers coming in, trying to, okay, I'll mix it this way. I'll do this. And then, wow, that's a great story.
Fresh ears by a guy that was probably 20 years old, right?
Right.
And I remember they would always go outside and listen to mixes in the car. I'm like, yeah, that's what you do. I mean, it doesn't matter how successful you are. I got to go listen in my car because it's the one place everybody knows what everything sounds like.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Wow. That's something. Ooh. Do you think that that you and Rick are going to write some more songs now that we got that one single from you? Now you teased the music fans with that song. I love the song. Do you think that you'll find yourself doing a couple more songs together, or?
I think that we're both up for it for sure. And we passed some ideas to each other. Rick is busy, you know, he mixes a lot of records. I mean, he owns a Grammy. He's a busy dude. He and he also works with his wife, who's a great artist. And so I know that we're probably going to. We started a few things. I think that, you know, I'm going to have to, I'm super busy up through the new year. And then hopefully I have ideas that I need to start now for next year. But one of them for sure is to get together with Rick, because I think it's so good for the both of us to do it. And I hope that other people enjoy that process, hearing it. So I'm hoping at some point we can get a few more songs, maybe do an EP. That would be amazing. I don't know how long that'll take us to do. It took us 2 years to do the last song. So I'm hoping we'll be a little bit quicker on that, on the next songs.
Well, it's just great that the door was open just by chance to do this in the
Yeah.
first place. It's a great
Yeah.
story. It's a happy ending story because things just happen over time. There were a lot of pressures to be successful back in the 80s because there was so much competition and so much, and it's a great record, but you're having to compete with all of these artists and the labels. I saw it firsthand how the labels, take a project, okay, and get everybody to love it, and then there's something else out there that they're going, oh, let's go. It just
And they also, I know how that business model worked. It's obviously different now. To some extent, it's different. I mean, I guess the thinking is the same. It's like they throw a lot out there, and if something starts edging forward, then that's when they go after that project and they push it through. And I get it. That's how it works. And Lions and Ghosts, I have so many, memories of almost. But it takes so much. It took so much then just to get a record deal because you couldn't. It was very difficult to put out a record on your own in those days.
yeah.
And so we had to get some. We felt if we want to get the kind of success that we'd hoped for and felt like was possible because we were very popular in Southern California. We had a great following, and a lot of great people wanted to work with us. 2 different labels wanted to sign us. But there was a lot going on in the world, and there was so many genres of music, and we really didn't fit into any of them, So I'm happy that we had that experience. It was a life lesson for sure. I learned a lot, and I wish that I had paid more attention then because I've had to make up for time in the last few years. I'm like, I have to do it myself now. Everyone does it themselves. I have to engineer myself. I have to mix myself. I have to record myself. And back then I was like, oh, he put a mic in front of my amp. Okay. I didn't think about the process of how you process everything to get it to sound like it's glued together, right?
Right. I guess the silver lining of that, though, is just that it gets to be the way you want it to be rather than someone saying, I'm going to put the amp over here and it's going to sound, like, or just even from a record label, like a song you want to release. This is the song I want the public to hear. So it's a mixed bag. There's pros and cons to it,
There is.
A lot more work.
It's all changed now too, because, well, I have my own label. So who's going to tell me no? I guess my partner and manager will tell me no. And he always tells me no to stuff. But I always feel like, okay, well, here's why I want to sell it to you. And I talk to him and he goes, I'm so happy we're doing this. Okay. You're right. So yeah, we just released my soundtrack today. And at first he goes, yeah, but that's a little different because we're doing these singer-songwriter things and whatever. And now he's like, I'm so happy we did this. It's great. It's a little Halloween present for everybody. So
yeah, I had just read the press release on that just the other day that this had just happened. So I wanted to briefly mention it. And I want to be respectful of your time too. You've been so gracious with your time. So I just wanted to just briefly mention that soundtrack as the village sleeps you're talking about. And
that's right.
And so it's like online, it's a streaming sensation, the movie, right? They said how many million views right now?
It's 2.5 million views just on Tubi.
That's pretty good. I mean, really,
when they made the movie, they made it right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened and everything was a mess. And so the movie went through all kinds of issues for distribution or to put it on DVD or whatever. And it was a friend of mine and he said, will you do the soundtrack? And I'm like, I would love to do the soundtrack for it. Here's what I'd like to do. And he goes, okay, you go do your electronic thing to it. So, and then I finished and they finished editing and then that seemed it. And next thing I know, he called me the other day. He goes, can you effing believe it's been seen this many times just on the one thing? And it's on Amazon Prime. It's also on YouTube. So I'm like, that's amazing. And he goes, I'm going to give you the rights back to the soundtrack. Would you like to put it out? I said, I would, and thank you very much.
How often does that happen in life, huh? I'm going to give you back the rights to your music. How often? It doesn't happen that often, right? That someone just says, hey, it's a very cool thing.
Never.
Wow.
So that's super cool. And I was able to look at the soundtrack in a different light, not having the images of the movie. I remixed it, and there were a few songs included in it, but I chose to only put No Promises on at the end. And it's kind of kind of 80s. To me, it's more of a modern new wave. And the vocalist Grant Nobleman, who I think the world of, his voice is, to me, he's the new Jeff Buckley, if you know Jeff Buckley.
Yeah, sure. Grace.
His voice is from another planet. So he sang the lead vocal and he wrote the song with me. And we have a side project called Francis Devout and the New Spiritualist, just to mess people up so they don't know what kind of band is that. I don't know. But we have a bunch of material. It's available online. I think that we're starting to work on some new stuff. I'd also like the world to get to know Grant Nobleman because he's an incredible artist. And so if I can help, that's what I want to do.
Well, if you put him in the same realm as Jeff Buckley, that says a lot. It really does. I mean,
I think it does, doesn't it?
It sure does. I mean, that and
no pressure. Sorry, Grant.
Yeah, right. I mean, that the album Grace, just an amazing album. You know,
it's a perfect album.
It's just mind blowing.
Yeah, and I don't know if people now it's some years have gone by. I don't know if younger people realize some of the people that they love in this day and age were greatly influenced by Jeff Buckley and by that record. That one record, wow.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Oof. The scoring process is so different than when you're making right? Because you said you mentioned it for briefly, you said you didn't have the images in front of you at one point, but then earlier on, when you were first doing this whole thing, right, you kind of see what the movie's going to be, and you kind of think, what kind of music do I want under this, and what kind would the director of the movie want, and what's the vibe? And
yeah, I asked the director after I recorded it already. That was the thing I did. It's like I do the whole thing and then I send it to him. I go, this is what I'm thinking. Well, you know, but yeah, it was a great process. I've had friends that have done a lot of soundtracks. I've been around and worked on stuff in soundtracks, but the scoring process was new for me. And I chose to do it all electronically. I think there is a little bit of guitar in the one song that I included, but everything else is all electronic. And I was having trouble sleeping during the lockdown. A lot was going on for a lot of people. So I mostly worked through most nights and I was by myself. It's quiet. And I just got in tune with where I felt like I was isolated. The people in the movie are isolated, and I sort of resonated with that feeling. And slowly I saw themes starting to crop up in the stuff that I was writing. And some of it is just disturbing noise. But then there's beauty in some of it also. And it was fun to sort of tie and weave this all together. And some characters for me would have a theme, and some situations or feelings would have themes. And it was so great to just lock it in. And I loved the process a lot. And I also liked the process of putting out as a soundtrack. I included some dialogue. I included, some regular music as well. It was a fun experience and one I certainly want to revisit soon.
Yeah, I mean, I would think it'd be very exhilarating to just the adrenaline flow, and then seeing the finished product and watching. Because think about how back in the day, silent movies and everything, and you think about, or you just turn the volume down on your favorite horror movie, it doesn't feel the same anymore.
No,
it's gone.
I probably should go to school and start learning about how you work on these things in all the contexts that you're talking about, because music, even you and I talking, if there was music playing behind us, we could totally change the mood or tone of our conversation by the instrumentation, major, minor, these things all play into the way we view films. And boy, films would be very different if they had alternate soundtracks.
Absolutely. And you might be, imagine that. Think about that. You got these movies that do these alternate endings, right? Sometimes they have different alternate endings because they say that they wanted to test press in with the audience and see which ending they like better before they release the film. How about alternate soundtrack? That's really something. I never would think about that. Right. Write that down, because you'd have the royalties from two different soundtracks. Well, not just now, but the money, but the the love, the sense of accomplishment that two versions of the same movie, the soundtracks, and some people like that one and some people like this one, and they like it for different reasons.
It could be a brilliant idea, but the word royalties, what is this?
Yeah, I know. I know. I know. I know.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, the only royalties I see are still things from the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah. 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 Unfortunately, right? It's just it's a very different landscape than
Yeah. Yeah.
So just briefly, I just want to ask you before we wrap things up, just what you said, busy, you have a busy docket between now and the end of the year. And you talked about maybe next year, maybe some stuff with Rick possibly. What else is going on this year for you?
Okay, so this year, well, okay, we've gotten the Lions and Ghosts record out, and we've got the new single out. We have 2 singles from Bird Streets, and the album comes out November 4th. It's called Lagoon, and I can't rave about it enough. And the reason I rave about it is because the songwriting is brilliant, and the people that are on it are so great. So Pat Sansone from Wilco
Right.
produced like half of the record. There's some brilliant producers out of New York that I'm sorry that I can't remember their name right this second, and I'm killing myself for that. And then I got to do 3 tracks with John, and on one of those tracks we have Aimee Mann, Pat and John brought in Jody Stevens from Big Star to play drums on a few tracks. They've got the guy from Super Drag in there. They have there's so many great musicians on the record, and I got Amy's crew on there. And then John and I have worked on some other stuff that's not even on that record, and Michael Penn's singing on one of those. We have so much stuff that's getting ready to come out. So we have John's Bird Streets record coming out. We have the soundtrack that just came out. Next year, I'm working on a tribute to Aimee Mann with a bunch of different artists. So I'm going to do sort of a, sings man. I want to find, there's so many people that are influenced by her and so many friends of hers. I really feel like there's tributes to everybody, but there's not a tribute to this great songwriter. That has to change.
Right.
So we're just starting to put together that list of people. We've talked to some people. So that's happening for next year. Perhaps we'll do the second Lions and Ghosts record, Wild Garden, because I have an alternate version of the whole record.
Wow, cool.
And I like to do that because it's interesting that the alternate version was done not too long after our first record. So it feels quite different than the way the album turned out to be. So I thought that might be interesting for the handful of fans that we have out there. And we're getting new ones every day. We actually got quite a few subscribers after that came out. So that was really great. Also, I'm working with a bunch of younger artists. And so we're going to see how we can get that to the people, What's the best way to introduce some new music? Because you're right, we get pelted with thousands of releases every week. So looking for the story, looking for the great songs to help people live and have the soundtrack to their lives,
Love the soundtrack, the life soundtrack. Yes, life soundtrack. It's all the music that threads and how we think about, like, how you can sometimes think about where you were when a certain song came out or when you first heard it, what you were doing. And it is, music is the soundtrack to life. It
really, really is. It's so, I know that you can go back and think about something and you go, yep, 1998, I was listening to blah, blah, blah. I was driving in my car, had a fight with my girlfriend, whatever it is. The music is the thing that really, for me, is a placeholder for the memory.
What would be the best way for people to reach your music as far as from a social media, or to hear you're very prolific in the things that you said today, that you've got a really good sensibility about the industry, about the music, and about the process. People want to learn more about your music and just your whole philosophy on music. Where's the best place for them on media to kind of hear firsthand from you? Well,
I've been a very bad boy and haven't been really updating the website and things like that, but I'm on Instagram more than the other platforms. I'm on Facebook, but for whatever reason, Instagram resonates more with me, just the ease and the use of it. So I post a lot on there. It's I'm under Michael Lockwood, the musician. Somehow I got verified and got a blue check mark. Don't ask me why. And then my label Sparkle Plenty is on there as well. And so I'm posting on all of those, and I repost stuff all the time. But there is a Facebook Sparkle Plenty, and I just put my toe back in Twitter. I was a little over Twitter for a while because it's overtly political, and I don't need that. I mean, I can watch CNN or I can watch whatever news station I want to watch, but I guess when I want to escape into seeing what so-and-so had for dinner last night, what so-and-so's kids are doing. And I also learn a lot about new music from artists that are on social media too, and they post, and I wouldn't normally know that. So I think the best place is to find me on Instagram. I do have a website. I'm going to be posting more about Francis Devout and the New Spiritualists because it's a really fun project, and we have some great music that not many people have heard. So I want to start maybe scooting that out into the world while we're working on all these other things. So I think that's the best place.
And there's lots of great pictures of guitars and pedals and everything on Instagram, for example, all the different pictures of all the great equipment they use, and so many different guitars and different setups, and it's fun to just kind of page through them all.
I'm not a well person. I do. And recently there's wedding pictures too. There's a few thousand wedding pictures floating out there after Monday. So
very exciting. That's so great. Michael, I mean, I just can't thank you enough. We'll talk offline for a quick second. I got to share that band name with you.
Please do. And I'll share mine with you too. I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to think about some questions that maybe other people haven't asked me, and I enjoyed the conversation. I felt like I made a new friend today. So
thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you.
We're looking forward to having people watch our interview, and certainly go and check out the music from Lions and Ghosts. Check out the soundtrack on Tubi from the movie. Check out, and just kind of then they'll want to go back like I did and look at all the pieces and gems of things that you've worked on. They'll want to go back and learn more about your music when they hear what you've done with Lions and Ghosts.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you.
So thanks again, and let's talk offline. Thanks so much, Michael.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.